I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Not literally, because you are here and you are listening, but close the eyes of your mind. I want you to go back to a moment, perhaps very recent, perhaps many years ago, a moment where someone you cared about caused you pain. And I want you to remember, with honesty, what was your very first impulse in that moment? You wanted to explain. You wanted to sit across from that person and say, "Do you understand what you did? Do you understand how that felt? Do you understand the weight of what you placed on me when you chose those words, when you made that decision, when you walked away as though it cost you nothing? You rehearsed it. Perhaps you wrote it down. Perhaps you sent a message at 2 in the morning because the silence had become unbearable and the need to be understood had grown louder than your own reason. I understand that impulse completely, because it does not come from weakness. It comes from love. It comes from the part of you that still believed at that moment that if only he could see what you see, if only he could feel what you feel, everything could be made right. That belief is one of the most human things there is, and I will not mock it. I will not dismiss it, but I will ask you with great care and with great honesty to examine what that impulse has ever actually produced. Think about it. Think about all the times you have explained yourself to someone who hurt you. Think about how carefully you chose the words, how much courage it took to say them, how much of yourself you placed on the table when you finally spoke, and then think about what happened next. Did he finally understand? Did the explanation close the wound? Did the conversation end with both of you standing in a place of genuine resolution where the hurt was acknowledged and the connection was restored? For some of you, perhaps once or twice, the answer is yes. And those moments are real and they matter. But for the majority of situations that bring a person to a point of genuine pain, the explanation did not do what you hoped it would do. More often, it produced one of a small number of outcomes. Either he became defensive, or he minimized what you said, or he turned the conversation back around until somehow you were the one apologizing. Or worst of all, he listened, he nodded, he said what needed to be said to end the conversation, and then continued behaving in exactly the same way, and you were left more exhausted than before, more confused, more convinced that you had somehow failed to communicate clearly enough, that if you had just found the right words, chosen the right moment, approached it from a different angle, the result would have been different. So you tried again and again, each time refining the explanation, adjusting the approach, believing that the problem was in the delivery rather than in the reality, that the person on the other side of the table was not interested in receiving what you were trying to give. This is what I want you to sit with, because this is where the teaching begins. A person who deliberately causes another person pain is not confused about what they are doing. Let me say that again, so it can land properly. A person who causes you pain is not confused about what they are doing. They may behave as though they are. They may perform surprise. They may act as though your hurt is unexpected, as though your explanation is revealing something they were genuinely unaware of. But in the deep, quiet place, beneath all performance, they know, people always know. The question is never whether they understand. The question is whether they care. And when a person does not care, your explanation becomes something else entirely. It becomes information. It becomes a detailed map of your emotional landscape, handed over freely, pointing to every place inside you that can still be reached. It shows them what matters to you. It shows them what you value. It shows them the exact pressure points that, when pressed, will produce the reaction they are seeking. And if that person is someone who derives something, consciously or not, from your distress, from the power of knowing that they can affect you, then your explanation is not a bridge. It is a gift you did not intend to give. I want to speak now about something that most people do not examine carefully enough. I want to speak about the relationship between explanation and identity. When we explain ourselves to another person after being hurt, what we are really doing, beneath all the words, is seeking permission. We are seeking confirmation that our pain is valid. We are seeking someone outside of ourselves to tell us that yes, what you felt was real. What happened to you was wrong. You are allowed to be hurt by this. We are outsourcing the authority over our own inner world to the very person who just demonstrated that they cannot be trusted with it. This is a profound thing to recognize, because it means that the impulse to explain is not simply about communication. It is about a much deeper need, the need for our reality to be confirmed by the person whose behavior created that reality. And as long as that need exists in the form I am describing, as long as your sense of whether your pain is legitimate depends on whether he acknowledges it, you will remain connected to him in a way that gives him enormous power over your inner life, even when he is not present, even when the relationship has ended, even when years have passed. So what is the alternative? Because I am not standing here telling you to suppress what you feel. I am not telling you to pretend that you were not hurt or that the pain does not exist. What I am suggesting is something more precise, and it requires a kind of inner honesty that is, I will not pretend otherwise, genuinely difficult. The alternative is to become the one who confirms your own reality, to sit with yourself and say, I know what happened. I know what I felt. I do not need him to agree with my account of events in order for my account to be true. I do not need his acknowledgement in order for my pain to be valid. What I experienced was real. What it cost me was real, and I will not place the key to that truth in his hands. This is not a small shift. This is not simply a technique for managing difficult conversations. This is a fundamental reorientation of where you locate your authority. And it is, if you are willing to do the inner work it requires, the beginning of a kind of freedom that no explanation ever produced. Now let us talk about what actually happens when you stop explaining, because this is where something remarkable occurs, something that most people do not anticipate, because they are so focused on what they themselves are feeling that they have not fully considered what is happening on the other side. When you stop explaining yourself to a person who has hurt you, you remove something from them that they were counting on. You remove the confirmation of your own disturbance. Because here is what that person, consciously or not, was waiting for. They were waiting for evidence that you are still affected, that they still occupy space in your mind, that whatever they did or said still has the power to move you, to unsettle you, to bring you back to them, even if it is only in the form of confrontation. Your explanation, no matter how composed, no matter how carefully delivered, contains within it the signal they were looking for. It says, you are still important enough to warrant this much of my attention. You are still central enough to my world that I have spent time and energy and emotional resource preparing what I need to say to you, and that signal, even when wrapped in dignity and delivered with restraint, is a form of contact that confirms your continued investment. Silence, true silence, not the silence of suppression, not the silence of someone waiting for the right moment to speak, but the silence of genuine redirection, is something that person does not know how to process, because it does not confirm what they expected. It does not follow the pattern. It does not provide the reaction that completes the loop they were waiting to close. And a person who expected a reaction and receives none is left in a state of uncertainty that is, in many ways, far more uncomfortable than any confrontation you could have offered. I am not saying this to frame silence as a weapon. I want to be precise here because the distinction matters. If you go silent in order to produce a specific reaction in another person, in order to make them wonder, in order to punish them through withdrawal, then you are still operating from a place of reaction. You are still allowing their behavior to dictate your strategy. The silence I am describing is not strategic. It is the natural result of having genuinely turned your attention somewhere else, somewhere more worthy of it, somewhere that is actually yours. Let me offer you a way to think about this that I have found to be useful. Imagine that your inner life, your attention, your emotional energy, your thoughts is a field, and what grows in that field is determined by what you water. Every time you return to the explanation, every time you rehearse the conversation, every time you replay what was said, and imagine what you should have said, you are watering something in that field. You are giving it light and nutrients and the conditions it needs to grow larger. The question is not whether that thing deserves to be watered. The question is whether growing it is serving you, whether the harvest it produces is something you actually want to be carrying. Because here is what I have observed, not just in abstract teaching, but in watching human beings navigate real pain over many years. The people who recover most fully from being hurt are not the ones who found the perfect explanation. They are not the ones who finally got the acknowledgement they were seeking. They are the ones who, at some point, made a quiet and irreversible decision to stop waiting for the other person to release them and to release themselves instead. That decision does not look dramatic. It does not arrive with ceremony. It is often made in a very ordinary moment, sitting alone somewhere, when you suddenly recognize the exhaustion of the cycle you have been in, the explaining and the hoping and the being disappointed and the explaining again, and something in you simply becomes done, not angry, not bitter, not performing detachment while secretly still attached, simply done, ready to redirect. When that moment comes, and it will come if you allow yourself to move toward it rather than away from it, you will notice something interesting. The impulse to explain does not disappear immediately. It will still rise in you, particularly in the early days. You will think of something you want to say. You will compose a message in your mind. You will imagine the conversation and how it would go, and this is where the practice begins. Not in the absence of the impulse, but in what you do when the impulse arises. The practice is to notice it, to acknowledge it, to say to yourself, yes, I see you, I understand why you are here, and then to consciously, deliberately choose not to act on it. Not because the feeling is wrong, but because the action it is pointing toward does not serve where you are going. This is the discipline I am speaking of, and it is a genuine discipline. It requires the same quality of attention and intention that any meaningful practice requires. You will not be perfect at it immediately. There will be moments when the impulse wins, when you send the message, when you make the call, when you find yourself at midnight typing out the explanation one more time. And when that happens, do not compound it with self-judgment. Simply return to the practice. Begin again. The path is always available, regardless of how many times you have stepped off it. There is something else I want to name here, something that sits underneath the explanation and gives it much of its power. It is the belief, often unexamined, that being understood by another person is what makes our experience real, that without his acknowledgement, Our pain exists in a kind of uncertain space, almost as though it might not be entirely true, as though the validity of what we went through depends on a witness, and not just any witness, but specifically the witness whose behavior caused the experience in the first place. This belief, when you bring it fully into the light and look at it clearly, does not hold. Your experience does not require his confirmation to be real. Your hurt does not require his acknowledgement to be valid. The truth of what happened does not change based on whether he is willing to see it. Reality is not a negotiation, and the sooner you stop negotiating with someone who is not bargaining in good faith, the sooner you can begin living inside the full and uncontested truth of your own experience. I want to close this point by speaking about what becomes possible when you have genuinely stopped explaining yourself, not just with this person, but as a pattern of being. Because what I have observed is this: the practice of not explaining yourself to those who have hurt you eventually extends into a broader relationship with yourself. You begin to require less external validation across all areas of your life. You become more comfortable with being misunderstood because you are no longer defining yourself through how others interpret you. You develop a kind of inner solidity that is not rigidity, not defensiveness, not the hardness of someone who has been hurt too many times and decided never to be soft again, but a genuine rootedness that comes from having located the authority over your own inner life, where it actually belongs, inside you. That rootedness is one of the most quietly powerful qualities a human being can carry. And here is what will happen, not as a strategy, not as a calculated move, but as the natural and inevitable consequence of a person becoming more genuinely themselves. He will notice, perhaps not immediately, perhaps not in any way he can articulate, but at some level, the person who expected you to keep reaching, who counted on the explanation as evidence of your continued need for him, will register that something has changed, that the dynamic he was relying on is no longer available, that you have moved somewhere he cannot quite locate, and you will not be thinking about him when that happens, because you will have already turned your face towards something far more worthy of your attention, the quiet, steady, ongoing work of becoming exactly who you were always capable of being before anyone convinced you that their understanding of you was more important than your understanding of yourself. The one who no longer needs to explain herself has already won the only battle that ever mattered.